Walk me through your Clay to SmartLead workflow, because I feel like you've got such a unique setup.
The biggest lesson I would have for people is open up a Supabase account and start caching your data.
If you stay to the end of the episode, you're going to find out why I think Eric is doing exactly the right thing with the wrong technology. Supabase is not the answer for your central database. We're going to get into why, what technology you need, and exactly what the right setup is. Stay to the end and we'll see what these guys have to say. So Eric is one of the bigger cold email influencer. He was one of the first Clay partners, so he really knows what he's talking about. Now, he is doing a lot of enrichment on cold email list building. So he pulls all these lists from Apollo, he scrapes them, he enriches them with things like Million Verifier within Clay, and as he'll later call this, that's a staging environment to do data cleanup and enrichment. But then you ultimately, as an agency especially, want to store all of that data. Why would you want to re-pull and re-enrich and spend those Clay credits and spend that time to do this? The answer is you wouldn't if you're doing it correctly. So he's solving this problem with something called Supabase. Now, Supabase is a relatively inexpensive Postgres database. It's meant to be a little more user-friendly than the more advanced, we'll call it professional cloud environments like AWS or GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform. So it's meant for kind of the MacGyver of us, the people that want to get in there and get started quickly. As we'll talk about, Postgres, even outside of Supabase on any platform, has built-in limitations, and he's going to talk about that in a second. So let's keep going.
The Postgres one, right? The one with
Supabase. Yeah, supabase.com.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. You're
And
going
so I've already been told that it's going to get buggy at our size and we need to move to Snowflake or whatever, but
Yeah.
data engineering nerds can figure that out for me one day.
As cheesy as it sounds, I am the data engineering nerd. I've started multiple companies that are all about centralizing data into a central database, and I've hired, 20 data engineers, and we've built products from scratch solving these exact problems. So just so you know, we're going to solve these problems for Eric right now. Okay, so again, the goal here, the dream outcome here, is that we're storing all of our enriched data into a central location so that you don't re-enrich the same data you've already pulled, say, 2 months ago or 6 months ago. So that's the goal. That's the reason he's doing this. Now, he's doing it for other reasons, I assume, for deeper analytics later on, but he doesn't get into this in this video. So the question, is Supabase the right solution? Now, he's saying it is, and he's alluding to the fact that he's already running into some issues around why he would need to go to a bigger data warehouse called Snowflake. So if you don't know Snowflake, you can Google Snowflake database. It's a very large enterprise-grade data warehouse environment that allows you to store a tremendous amount of data. It's highly technical, it's extremely expensive. Expect to spend $100,000 a year standing it up and managing it across multiple developers who have to manage it for you. If you are not a big company, you do not want to work with Snowflake. It's extremely cumbersome. You need very specific experts to get started with it. So unless you have to do it, I wouldn't do it. But let's get back to Supabase. Why is he having any issues in terms of performance or lag or bugginess or any other issues you might think of when he's saying that? The answer is Postgres as a technology is a structured database. So what that means is it's like a CSV file. You have columns and you have rows. Now, what happens is when you search a database of that type, a structured database, a Postgres database, you literally are searching through every single row every time you do a query. And a query is simply saying, give me a return on, say, this email address within Clay. Now, that's not a big deal if you have 20,000 contacts in your database. But if you end up having, a million, or 4 million, 10 million, or 20 million in the future, which is not inconceivable, especially if you're a cold email agency where you're scraping lists across many clients across time, potentially even years. You're going to end up with a relatively large lead list, far bigger than the average company would experience. And so this means you'll have millions of rows of data. And that's just on the contact data. We're not talking about company data. If you add separate companies and the contacts, obviously the data expands. Now, the problem is that when you're using Clay and say you have a new lead list of, say, 5,000 records, and you're doing a lookup via the endpoint, you are going to run into a big challenge in terms of querying that database, because you're not just doing one lookup across, say, 20 million rows of data, or call it 1 million rows of data, but you're now doing it across 10,000 new unique lookups, because again, each contact needs to be looked up to the database across those millions of records. So you can multiply 10,000 times whatever total rows you have, and that's the level of search that's occurring. That creates a massive load on the Postgres database because the computer literally has to go and do that calculation and look through it. Now, the problem is that result, if you don't know what you're doing and you haven't done this before, is it's going to look like it's buggy. It's going to look like it's freezing. It's going to look like it's not working for whatever reason. We're just talking about transactional lookups. The whole goal of a Postgres database is really to do read-write. So you can look up to a database and you can get something out of the database. You can potentially overwrite it, which means change something in that database. Now you can do some very basic lightweight analytics on top of it and put a lovable dashboard on top of the Supabase if you have very low data volumes. What we'll talk about in a moment is that when you scale up and you want to do anything beyond transactional volume of just lookups, let's say you want to analyze your cold email volume and do better reports using an MCP or some type of front-end dashboard like Looker dashboard, or you want to use, I don't know, Metabase or some type of top level analytics platform, you're not going to be able to do that on a Postgres database with the volume of cold email. Another thing I'll leave you with, the data that you're collecting shouldn't just be limited to the contact data. You should also be connecting into a SmartLead or into, say, an Instantly or some other sequencer and HeyReach and all these other tools, importing back all of the activity within the contact record. That creates a lot more rows and a lot more columns within your database, because you're not just tracking contacts, but all the activities they take per contact. So take 1 million contacts, and let's say they all on average take, I don't know, 50 actions. Now you have 50 million rows of contact activity just for that, just for the email. And then you do that for, I don't know, HeyReach, and there's a bunch of conversations occurring. And then you do it for a bunch of other platforms like your dialer, and you're tracking dials. You can see how quickly the database gets expanded tremendously. Postgres will not handle that. Supabase will not handle that. And even if you were just getting started, I wouldn't recommend Supabase anyways, because it requires some understanding of creating a foundational data model, which means how do you connect companies to contacts? Do you know what a primary key is? Even if you do all that, do you know how to deduplicate? This is all assuming that you have a deduplicated database. Doing that in Supabase or any Postgres database without some very clear logic and data engineering understanding is extremely difficult to do, especially if you are a solo entrepreneur or you have a small agency or even a medium-sized agency. If you're not a data engineer, you can expect to spend $20,000, $30,000 getting a contractor to come in and set up a Supabase of this sorts. It's going to have all these edge cases you haven't even thought of. And I really wouldn't recommend using Supabase for this use case. We'll get into it further, but let's keep listening.
Our data pipeline to this point, most of the time, is pulling data from Apollo, and either we're staging it in that HubSpot that we were just talking about, or then we're just putting it directly into Clay for processing. Whether we stage it in HubSpot and it gets put into Clay for processing automatically, or we're manually importing the CSV, both of the processes are the same. And so the first thing that we have to do, because we're so email heavy, is our email verification waterfall. And so this is what
So what he just said was merging CSV files and HubSpot and, say, Clay tables all into one place. The question is, how do you make sure that all of those different data sources speak to each other? Meaning, how do you know that the thing that's labeled in HubSpot, called email, is the same naming convention as the one in Clay as the same one that was in the sequencer SmartLead? The answer is you have to have some type of what they call, it's an ETL. It's a fancy word for extraction, transformation, and loading. It's an integration layer when you merge multiple sources of data together. And you have to have a way to transform the data for these different schemas, which is just labels of the columns across different platforms, into a unified schema, one single schema. Otherwise, you end up with 3 different columns in the central database, and it creates chaos. So you need a way to transform all of that into one place. That is something that Supabase won't do for you. So you need an integrations layer, and he'll get into this a little bit, but one of the fundamental things you need to work out is you need a common schema, you need a good domain model, which is how you relate companies to activities to contacts, and you're going to need this integration layer that's going to be stable. He talks about error retry. Integrations can be fragile, they can fail. When you get into rate limits, which we'll talk about later on, especially with CRMs, it becomes really problematic because you're going to have data just disappear. So you need a way of making sure that doesn't happen, which requires a very stable integration layer. If you do not have that, you're going to lose data, and also you're not going to know why. It's just be lost, and your clients will suffer, you'll suffer, and you won't have any clue as to the scope of the problem. So Supabase here is just a Postgres database. We already talked about why that's not sufficient. You also need deduplication, which Postgres and Supabase doesn't handle, and you also need this integration layer for ETL, extraction, transformation, and loading. That's not handled by Supabase. So that means you have to have a guy who goes in there and does this for you. At high volumes, N8N will start to break. Make or Zapier will start to break. So you need native integrations into these platforms, which requires either using something like Django or Python, which is coding language, or you can use something like TypeScript for an integration layer. This is where you need professional data engineers to build this for you. You're going to spend $20,000, $30,000 just standing up a very simple version of this. So let's keep going.
Why I think no matter who you are, you should be caching your data because Clay is very much a middleware. It's not like the benefit of Apollo is as soon as you unlock a credit, you have that credit unlocked all the time. They're going to remember that for you. You own that credit. It is what it is. Boom, you're ready to go. In Clay, they don't have that process. It's a completely different tool. And so one of the things that we started doing was we were saying, hey, we're processing so much email validation data, and we're definitely paying over and over again for these email accounts. So the first thing that we do is we will run through and we will first look up the Apollo email in our Supabase account and see, okay, hey, have we ever looked up this email before? And this circles back in a little bit, but have we ever looked up this email before? If yes, when was the last time it was verified? If it was verified in the last 90 days and the domains match of the person that we uploaded, pretty set to just send people that email again.
So again, what he's doing here is he has the master record in Supabase. He's looking within Clay on an HTTP GET request where he's pulling out emails that are already existing in the system. In Clay, this is going to be a very simple lookup with a simple endpoint that will return a JSON object. This is a little technical, but you can simply just do a question within a column in Clay that says, does the JSON object exist? And it will say, if it does exist, it means that the data's in the database. Sounds technical. It's really not. I could explain it in 2 minutes on an actual call. But my point here is that he's looking to see if he already has the data. It's very smart, and you should be doing this.
Then if we don't have a lookup, we then verify it with Lead Magic first, because Lead Magic is...
And if they don't have the lookup, meaning if it doesn't exist in the database, then you want to just proceed as if you don't have it, and that means you have to do the verification. So simply by doing the lookup, he prevented the re-enrichment in this entire sequence of steps he's about to get into. So it's saving time and energy and effort by not re-enriching.
Just the fastest provider with the best outputs that we've seen. So we'll verify it with Lead Magic first. We have, and this is another really interesting lesson that we learned with Clay. There is a Easter egg of a formula. It's called get status of cell or something like that. It was one of my LinkedIn posts, and maybe we could put it in the show notes. What we will then do is if Lead Magic fails because we ran out of credit, we then move to Prospio's verification. And if Prospio fails because we ran out of credits, then we move to Million Verifiers verification. So even on our email verification side, we're playing this game of even if there's a failure, and then you have to use the get cell status one, because you can't just do, oh, if email is not verified from Lead Magic, verify it again, because you're just going to keep getting the same results and you're just going to keep paying over and over again. So we have 3 verifications.
So we're a little bit in the weeds here. What he's talking about is within Clay, he's doing a waterfall enrichment across multiple email verification tools. And if one runs out of credits or fails, he then goes to the next step. And then he does the same thing. And if, again, he runs out of credits, he gets a failure, he goes to the next step. And he's essentially pulling anybody out that fails the verification. And if he doesn't have enough credits, he'll keep going on to the next part of the sequence. And this is all within Clay, within different columns for verification. Again, absolutely critical, 100% spot on.
Steps to make sure that none of them fail. And then Million Verifier has top-ups and is super cheap. So that's always the end one there.
Shout out to Million Verifier. I use them as well. They're great.
Then again, whatever we don't validate from Apollo and we don't look up, then we go through our email waterfall to try to find them. So then in that order, we go Lead Magic again for speed. And they just released this new feature, which is the first email provider I've ever seen to release a feature that they're looking up the employment history of the person as well too. And if they have a valid email, but they've moved on to another company, they're telling us about that. Then we go Prospio, because we're like OG Prospio fans. And then we go ICPs. I think ICPs in our testing has done, if ICP says it's valid, the likelihood that it's valid is the highest thing.
The highest.
And then TriKit at the end of that as well then too. All of these baked into the conditional formulas of if we run out of credits of any of them, just keep moving on. And then we get all of the emails from those. If Lead Magic finds an email, we're not finding another one with TriKit because we're just taking one shot at it. Then one more time through with Million Verifier. And then our email verification step is almost done. Then we're just...
So yeah, that was all email verification. That's super intense.
Dumping all of that data back into Supabase, where we just do a lookup and we say...
So now what he just said was he's dumping it back into Supabase. So essentially the first part of the step on the front end was, let me just look up to the database to see if it exists. And if it does exist, then we have it. We're going to use that. If it doesn't exist, go through this entire waterfall enrichment and then take the verified contact with the email and put it into Supabase. This way, the next time he goes to do a lookup, say tomorrow or a week later, he will then be able to find it, that little JSON object lookup, to see if it already exists. That's exactly what he's talking about. So this is 100% accurate. The thing that I think is missing, aside from using Postgres, which we'll get into the solution for that in a moment, is this idea that you should be doing more than looking up just do you have it? So what happens, as we all know, if you are a cold email agency or if you do a lot of outbound campaigns, is you have a total addressable market. There's only so many contacts in the world that you can use. So you're going to be going through that market over and over again over time, especially if it's a relatively small market. Obviously, if you have like video production where you have 20 million potential companies across planet Earth that could buy, it's a little different. If you're in a more constrained market, call it lawyers or something like that, or I don't know, CTOs at North American SaaS companies, you're going to have a smaller market, call it 50,000 or 100,000 people. Once you send to them once, say 2 months or 3 months later, you're going to send to them again and again. So you don't want to just look up, do you have the contact information? You also want to look up, is the person on my do not contact list? Are they unsubscribed? Are they bounced? Are they an active deal? Are they a client? So this is what I would call a do not contact list of those different statuses within it. That's a big deal. So you might be doing this right now in a sequencer, say within SmartLead or Instantly or Email Bison, but that's not sufficient. What you ideally should be doing is have a central database, not Supabase, and you should put it into one place where it automatically updates the do not contact status. So anytime you get a bounce from, say, SmartLead, it updates the status to call to bounce. If it is unsubscribed, it updates the status to unsubscribed. Say from HubSpot, you get a client that just won a deal. That opportunity status triggers a change in the status within the central record that says client. Same thing if you get a positive reply from, say, SmartLead or Instantly, that positive reply on one of those labels you have within the sequencer should automatically fire a new webhook to then update the status in the central database to active deal. So you want to have this central place across all these platforms all in one place to make your do not contact list evergreen and a flywheel that's automated. He's not talking about that right now. He's very focused on just deduplication, which is important. But the next step is the thing that you found a duplicate on the do not contact list. Because just because you found it doesn't make it bad. It means you have it. The question then becomes, what do you do with that information? And the answer is, if you run out of your total addressable market and you need to rerun through it, you're going to need to go see if it's on the do not contact. If it's on the do not contact, you obviously never want to re-enrich. You never want to send to it again. You just want to leave it alone. But if it's not on the do not contact list and you have it, you go to a third step. And he hasn't talked about this because he's not thinking about how do you get the data from the sequencer into Supabase or the central record at this point. But this is where you need to go. You need to connect into the sequencer, say SmartLead or say Instantly, and you need to be matching the replies, all the sends, all the replies, all the interested replies, all the statuses back to the same contact within the central record to see when the person replied. Now, why would you want to do that? Because within Clay, when you're building a new table, you also want to find, did I recently send to this person? Why would you want to do that? Because obviously you don't want to resend to the same people too often. Now, there's an argument that the whole idea of burning the TAM is not legit and it's not a thing. I think that's true to some extent, but I think you should be aware of how often you're sending. It's just like in advertising, for paid advertising. There's something called ad blindness. If you send something too often to the same person, you're going to end up burning the market to some degree. So my suggestion is don't oversend more than, say, every 60 days or 90 days, and you can go through the market over and over again. But you should know when you last sent to them. So within the central database, if you're connected to SmartLead, you can then reference in Clay, hey, when was my last send date? Or when was the last reply date? So the workflow that I would suggest, in addition to what Eric's saying here, is on the front end, look to see if you have it. If you do have it, is it on the do not contact? If it's not on the do not contact, then say, did I send to it in the last 90 days? And you can look up to that in the central record and say, yes, I did send to it in the last 90 days. I'm not going to send to it right now. And then move forward with anybody remaining. And then you can have those guys you've already sent to previously, but you know you haven't sent to recently. So that's a big deal. Then you obviously continue with the net new information through this entire workflow that Eric has been talking about. But those are some additional things that I would add on. And that is a big deal, but it requires additional tech integration, which means you have to integrate with the sequencers. You have to have an endpoint that allows you to pull that data out in a nice way and also update it back into the database in a nice way. Supabase doesn't offer that. And if you were to do this within Supabase, you'd have to have a very particular setup that would require custom development from a professional to set this up for you. So again, Supabase won't solve this out of the box.
Here's today's date, send all of the data to Supabase, all of it. So if we found any new emails, great. If we updated any emails, great. Cache all of that data. And then what we will...
So he has used cache several times. Cache isn't technically the right word for this. Typically, a cache is a temporary data store that's sitting in between an actual database and the front end of an application. So a cache would actually be something called Redis, which is is a middle layer between, say, a Postgres database and the front end. This is technical, but just so you guys know, if you hear the word cache, it just means a temporary store of data that can be referenced quickly. What he's doing here with Supabase is technically not a cache, just as a reference.
And regularly do is then some people are like, why are you doing the lookup on the Apollo email address? It's because regularly we will run a Python script to unite our Supabase and HubSpot data. Then there's another quirk for the nerds out there that HubSpot integrates perfectly with Apollo. And so any email address you have with a first name, last name, and some other parameters, you can then unite your Apollo data with your HubSpot data. And then we can constantly keep those email addresses. So anytime we're sucking out email addresses, we have circle of just keeping all of this data really fresh. No exploits. This is how they want you.
It's legit.
Yeah, this is how they want you to be using the platform. And so then that's how, if we find a new email for somebody, we know that we're like looking up another good email in Apollo and we're keeping that data fresh. And then
that entire merging of HubSpot into Apollo, into other tools like Clay, he's saying he uses a Python script. It's extremely advanced. You don't do that. It's not something you're just going to spin up with Supabase. We're now talking about the ETL part of the discussion. You're going to require a developer to come in and set that up for you. And you can expect just to do the most basic integration to spend $5,000, $10,000 just on one integration. Try to do that across multiple tools and have this normalized domain model and schema, which again sounds like jargon and crazy tech speak. The point is, get ready to spend $20,000. Yes, you think that you're spending your $25 Supabase account. That's just table stakes. Get ready to spend $20,000, $30,000 just on your setup.
And then in order to get into SmartLead, basically from there, it just depends on what the campaign. Then we tell the team, you cannot launch a campaign. You cannot launch any enrichment without a conditional formula for like master email column is not empty. And that's the final validation of the email column. So we're not wasting any money on things past that. And then it just really depends on what the campaign calls for. A tip that I've talked about all the time that I'll just mention is we never write the full email and then send it to SmartLead. We always are just doing like little snippets and then AI generating the parts that we need. Because you don't the more words that you output with AI, the more risk that you're taking. And so you don't need to output every time. I saw on your website that you help people with email outreach. You need to output email outreach. So like I saw you help people static and then just AI generate the rest of it. And then we're pushing.
That's a really good point. So this is outside the scope of this discussion in terms of databases and what you should be using, but 100% you should have a more normalized like static template for your cold email and then have very specific merge fields that are AI written that are referenced from say Clay or the central database. But this is extremely important.
Sorry, I'm saying you because you verbatim, if you look at the Smart Writer code base, that's verbatim what I do. That's like to one. This was 5 years ago. Prompt engineering, like when we were doing smart, that's like we do static plus dynamic because you give AI even a little bit of flexibility and just does stupid shit.
And then I also see that if we also tell it,
just want to belabor that point. It's just like everyone's so obsessed with AI copywriting. You should have AI on guardrails. So 95% should not be AI written. And then you should have merge fields that are injecting it in with custom variables. You don't even need AI to do this. If you have a good enough database with a good enough research on your variables, you can do very customized contextual emails that are highly personalized without any AI. It's just about having the right variables for a person. So for example, you could find a guy named Bob and find out like what Bob's favorite restaurants are from say Instagram and then see where he lives. I don't know, a particular address and find out all the restaurants that are nearby to him and then make references to say, hey, we know you love Italian. There's 4 Italian restaurants down the street. That doesn't require AI. You can use AI, but if you have the right database, you can reference those columns in the database to do this.
So technically we're AI generating that line sometimes because technically I saw on your website that you help people is technically AI generated, but we will prompt it and say, do not change this part. This is the prefix that you need to start with every single time. Also, it like knows what the sentence is going to be, so then it outputs better things from there as well too. Yeah, when I was working at Clay, that was like maybe one of the first things that I discovered that I was like, oh, you need a prefix here so you can control the message and what it's looking. But so yes, and so for people who are like, yeah, but Eric, last month on our SmartLead account, we did 5.2 million. So across everything, we were probably encroaching 6 million emails. And so people might be saying like, oh, this is just for you, but you reuse a lot more data than you might think. And I think everyone everyone could really take advantage of having a $15 a month Supabase account.
Again, he's right. So for my cold email agency clients, we have 41 clients at our agency. Some are RevOps, some are agency clients for cold email. But I can say that we're sending just for one client 2 to 3 million emails per month. And when you get into higher volumes, especially, this type of data migration and data analysis becomes extremely difficult. But even if you're doing this at a small scale and you're just getting started, you want to prepare now, because if you don't do this, if you don't think about these things, by the time you get to 10 or 20 clients, you're going to run into a wall. And your entire operation flywheel will collapse. And you're going to have GTM engineers who are not deduplicating or re-enriching or wasting your clay credits or just spending hours doing things they shouldn't be doing, like deduplicating using VLOOKUP. So what he's saying here is 100% accurate. The key thing is that I disagree with the use of Supabase, because this idea that you're going to get a $15 or $20 per month Postgres database that's going to solve all of these deeper edge cases like integrations, merging, normalization, deduplication, that's not actually going to happen. You're going to have to work with some type of operational consultant who is a data engineer that would have to stand this up for you over the course of the next year and a half. So it's a big undertaking. Now, this also just assumes that you just want a transactional database for the most basic lookup, like we were talking about here. But the reality is that you probably want to do more. You probably want to do reports. Now, like we talked about earlier, you're going to need to have something more than Supabase. You're going to need what they call a serverless database, something like BigQuery. So Google BigQuery, it's a serverless database that allows you to do very advanced queries, which means searches into the database, to create very advanced analytics and reports. So imagine trying to ask very simple questions, but are difficult from a data perspective, such as which of my qualified deals came from which subject line? You're not going to do that in Supabase in an easy query. You're going to need to, one, have an analytic strategy. Are you tracking subject lines? Are you tracking offers? You need to store that in a central record, and then you might want to visualize that in some type of dashboard. To pull that into the dashboard, you need to do a bunch of what they call SQL queries. SQL queries is essentially a computer code that allows you to look into the database and pull out the information you need. And then you can do something called joins, where you can join different tables together and data sets together to do formulas to come up with the thing that you want, such as like a reply percentage or such as some deep dive of some part of that data set. That requires a much more powerful technology than Postgres is going to allow at scale. So that's where BigQuery comes in. And also, the problem is Postgres, although it's faster than, say, HubSpot, it still has its limitations in terms of speed. So there's actually a technology on Postgres that's much better than Supabase called AlloyDB. It's 4 times faster than Supabase and Postgres. It's offered by Google Cloud. So is BigQuery. So those are the technologies you really want. AlloyDB and you want BigQuery combined into one. For your analysis of your cold emails, you're going to want BigQuery in terms of those reports. In terms of your read-write transactional, do I have the data? Is it on the do not contact list? Did I recently send to that? You want AlloyDB matched with something called a search technology called ElasticSearch, which allows you to go much faster back and forth, which will speed up your entire workflow. And speed matters here. So Supabase does not have any of that. It's 4 times slower. It doesn't have ElasticSearch. It will not allow you to do the reporting mechanisms you need once you create this database. And my point is, if you're going to invest all this energy and all this time to build this central record, you want to build it on top of a technology stack that's performant not now, but forever and always. And it scales with you as you grow, no matter how big you get. And so you can see Eric's starting to run into that right now when they're saying go to Snowflake. Snowflake won't solve the problem for you either, because it's just a data warehouse. It's not going to support in these larger analytics in the way that you might want.
We don't really save, like in a perfect world, I would like to be saving. We use to find case studies on people's websites pretty often. That's just like one of my favorites to do. I would like to be caching that data in a Supabase somewhere. We just haven't really.
Okay, that's a big deal, what he just said. He's doing research on a particular, say, point of the research, which is these case studies. I believe that's what he said. And so whatever data you're pulling, whether it's, their gender, or whether it's like a company about section, or maybe it's just at the actual campaign level, what subject line did you send or what offer did you send? These are various variables. Now, each variable is related to a certain type of what they call object. Stay with me. I know this is technical, but it matters. Within a database, you have different domain models. You've heard me say that a couple times. A domain model is essentially the way that these different tables match to each other. So what is a table? You might have a company table, which is all your companies, and then you have a different table, which is your contacts. And you might have a third table, which is your activities, like the email replies and sends, et cetera, et cetera. All of this has to be tracked and then combined together. Again, Supabase is difficult to set up when you try to do something like that. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to take all of those variables and put it in the central database. Right now, it's stuck in clay. So the question is, how do you load that in there? But more importantly, once you have the data in there and you are looking at your reports, if you have the reports built upon this central database, which is ideal, you want to get all the insights from all of your sends and how many contacts you have and who have you sent to, when last time you sent to them. You want to be able to then query the data, which means filter the data down by these variables, or just be able to look up and say, what's my case study within my central database? So that's what he's talking about here. It's a very important use case, but it's something he's not solving for because it adds this additional layer of integration and matching and normalization in the columns or schema.
Gotten it there. But that's like things that if I were restarting, I would start those processes as well to just, if you've got the data already, don't give it up, just keep it. It sounds complicated, but caching your data is something that I recommend everybody do. And then if somebody's, why don't you just use a CRM? The API just isn't fast enough at our scale, and it usually starts blocking things. And so you can always...
So what he's talking about fast enough at scale with the API is something called a rate limit. So if you go into HubSpot, you're at a like 10 to 20 per second rate limit, which means you can only push and send 20 points of data in at any second. Try to do that across 1 million rows and you're sitting there for a long time. Same thing with Clay. Clay has a very slow rate limit. So you see this very slow back and forth between the CRM and Clay. In addition, CRMs, because they typically have a lot of clients, they are throttling your use of the server, which means you have this very long queue of your data sitting there, just waiting, like you're waiting to get on a plane. And it's saying, okay, we're ready for you. We can now send the data. Now, sometimes when you send a tremendous amount of data with a very tight rate limit, you can actually see data loss occur when you push data into the CRM or pull it out of the CRM. And this is where having some type of central database with a very wide open rate limit, like 2,000 or 3,000 per second, allows you to capture all the data, hold it, and then error retry it until it gets into the next system. That's a very critical piece. Again, Supabase does not do that for you. So this error retry piece. Now it does have a large rate limit around, I think, 1,800 per second, but nonetheless, it's still a problem because if you're storing any data in the CRM, trying to pull that out, get ready to wait and wait. This is why you should never use a CRM for a central database of this type.
Have a data warehouse for, again, $20 a month, and then have it write Python scripts to just over time, just keep your other CRM stuff updated, because the API just doesn't run fast enough on the, because we also have a $15 HubSpot plan. Like it's just not running fast enough, or $20, whatever we pay. So anyway, it sounds complicated. A lot of the recommendations I have there in the redundancies, the verification providers, in the redundancies, and making sure that not just if it doesn't find anything, you have a redundancy. If it errors, you have a redundancy.
Yeah, you build up a waterfall system on a bunch of catch-alls, try catches, right? If it fails, you've always got a mechanism, so your system's bug smooth. You've never got a blocker. So honestly, kudos.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually really, really good.
Okay, so basically we got to the end of the rainbow here. What I really wanted to get to here is that you need to have a performant technology stack. So you're going to need to have, in my opinion, not Supabase. That's not good enough. You need something that's 4 times faster. It's called AlloyDB. It's a Postgres database. You're also going to need a BigQuery type instance, which is for your analytics. So that holds all of the email activity and the replies from the sequencer and all these different systems. And we're just talking about cold email. Once you start to add in HeyReach and your CRM data, you really want a bigger server with a more performant technology called BigQuery. You also need ElasticSearch to be able to search through all of this, and you're going to need some Django, which he's calling Python, to connect the data together using ETL, extraction, transformation, and loading. Postgres is one small little piece of that entire puzzle. So $10, $25 a month is not really the answer. It's a much, much deeper investment than you think. Now, here's the big thing. The reason I've taken all this time and energy to explain this to you guys is because I own RevyOps.com. We have a completely managed, fully stood up central database specifically built to solve this exact problem for cold email and GTM experts. It is AlloyDB. It is BigQuery. It is Elasticsearch. It already has those Django integrations across all the tools all in one place. It's $100 per month. Per database, it's $100 per month. And you can separate all of your clients in one place that you can go between each client where they have their own endpoints to connect into their own Clay accounts and their own Instantly or SmartLead accounts all in one place. But here's where it gets better. It automatically deduplicates and it automatically rolls up into a master database that automatically deduplicates. So you have one endpoint for your master record across all clients in one place. In addition, it connects into SmartLead, it connects into HubSpot, it connects into all these different tools like HeyReach. It automatically does that normalization and merging into one specific place. I've invested my own funds of over $250,000 to do this, to build this application, to solve this exact problem. It is going to solve your problem 1,000 times better than Supabase. It turnkeys the entire implementation. You can be up and running in about 10 seconds. You click a button and your database is ready to go, and you can start your integrations. We have a full clay table for all of your enrichments and to do the lookups. And if you guys would like to learn more, I'm happy to talk to you guys on an actual live demo. Go to RevyOps.com. I hope you guys have found this useful. Eric is 100% right, and he is on the cutting edge. As someone who has built multiple tech companies and data engineering companies and central database platforms, and I've sold one before, I can say that there's another level, and I hope that me and Eric get to work together, and I hope that you guys, if you have your own agency and you're building this, that you will trust RevyOps to solve this problem. We have a number of case studies from other agencies. We have over 40 agencies right now actively using this to manage all of their lead lists, and there's so many more reports that we offer on top of this. So all the reporting is turnkey for you as well. You can give white labeled access to your clients. They can see all of their lists, all cleaned in one place. There's so much more I could talk about, but I hope this has been helpful. I'll see you guys on a demo, RevyOps.com. Ben Reed, thanks so much.